What's up, guys? It's Clint Coons here, and in this video, I want to talk about a 1031 exchange mistake you might be committing when you buy replacement property. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so this is the deal here. When it comes to 1031 exchanges, there's a lot of information out there. It gets bounced around. Some of it's totally accurate, and some of it is questionable, which in turn leads people to make decisions that typically aren't in their best interest when we think about asset protection planning. And most notably, what it comes down to is when you're buying replacement property, how you have to take title. Most individuals that I've dealt with that have come to me always come to me with the same scenario. Oh, I talked to this person, or I talked to my a CPA or an attorney, and they told me that I have to close in the same entity that is selling the property. And so what does that mean? Well, for example, if I have a limited liability company, this is actually a deal that I just dealt with this past week with a client, a platinum client that had a question, called me up, and they have a California LLC. They've had this limited liability company set up for 15 plus years. It's done some transactions inside of it. It's something, I didn't set this one up. And it's one of those that we've had there that was part of their initial structure when they came to Anderson. I started working with them. That we just knew that, hey, we got to kind of leave it there because of the nature of the beast, and we're not going to change it, but we'll eventually work out of it. So they have this property that's inside of here, and they're looking to do a 1031 exchange on this property and buy replacement property, let's say in Oklahoma. So this is where they're going to be replacing. They've identified the property there. Now, the issue for this client, okay, that owns this property, is that they don't want the replacement property to be owned in their California limited liability company. And they were told that they had to close in the same entity that is selling the property. Sometimes this is referred to as down leg and up leg. You have to close in the up leg property, which is the one you're buying, has to close in the down leg owner, which is the LLC selling it. Now, that information is technically correct, but it's not what you have to follow from a tax standpoint. What we're talking about is closing the same owner. We're looking at from the IRS perspective. Is this the same owner? Not legal owner, but tax owner. That's what we're focusing on. And people tend to conflate these terms and they think, well, that means legal owner. No, it's tax owner. That's the issue here. So as I explained to them, that when they dispose of this property here and they find their replacement property that they're ultimately going to close on, we don't need to close in the name of the California LLC. They don't want to do that because there's issues with that LLC. In fact, they want to shut the LLC down. And so what way you can set this up is you can actually create a new limited liability company for your new purchase in a 1031 exchange. So you got a clean entity, no pullover liability that could come from this existing entity. So you set up a brand new entity for closing purposes. But here's what you need to make sure of. That the owner, the member that is, of this new LLC is the existing LLC. So this existing LLC will be the member of this LLC. This LLC will be a disregarded. So that's what I mean by for tax purposes, it's the same owner because it's disregarded. So on the tax return, for this client, all this will flow back down to them and it'll look the same on their 1040 this year. So we're going to set up California LLC owns the Oklahoma LLC. It owns a new property. And then next year, what we're going to do, so we're setting this up, we're going to close out this limited liability company here and transfer this LLC over to their Wyoming LLC and park it where it should be. But we're going to wait a year before we do that. So this is a way in which you can extricate yourself out of an existing structure on your 1031s into a new LLC. But the key is that the owner needs to match up, needs to be the same. So you're going to have to set it up as a disregarded entity. Now, if you had two individuals that are owning the property, well, that's going to create a complication for us. It's not going to work. I mean, you couldn't do one LLC. So really quick, I hadn't thought about doing this. Let's say we've got these two investors. They own title to this real estate. They agree, hey, let's do a 1031 exchange on this. We'll buy some replacement property. So if they want to exchange out into another building over here, let's say it's even in the same state, it doesn't matter. They couldn't set up one LLC and both of them own it because this is going to be a partnership. The only way this would work is if they were husband and wife or spouses and they lived in a community property state. So if it's just two joint venture business partners and they own it as tenants in common, which is how this would be held, if you wanted to give yourself asset protection in this deal, what you would have to do is follow this structure here. You would create two limited liability companies as follows, both of them disregarded back to the owner, okay? And then the replacement property would be owned as tenants in common between these two LLCs. And this is really an important strategy to consider if you're doing a 1031 exchange and you have a partner, because now you have asset protection. A lot of individuals that are in TICs, tenant in common agreements, and where they're going into replacement property on a 1031 exchange, they're not told about this. And so what happens is they end up taking title to property again in that tenant in common relationship in their own name, and they're exposed, they have risk. Whereas if you use a disregarded LLC for each partner now, you've minimized your risk and you've taken that off your shoulders. So 1031 exchanges, granted, they can be complicated, but knowing your options on what you can do with them, I think is really important. If you want to learn more, be sure to check out the show notes where you can set up a strategy session with someone in our firm and we can discuss this if you're considering doing a 1031 exchange and help you look at your options as far as setting up an entity to exchange into. Yeah, if you're not yet a subscriber to my channel, be sure to subscribe so you'll get notified of content as I produce it on a weekly basis. Take care.